सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
You see me carrying a bit of homework today. That's because we are dealing with a particularly complex subject. In fact, if you see this in my hands, you will see this could be a flow chart, maybe for a factory or a chemical process. In fact, you guessed right. This is a flow chart for a chemical process. This is the chemical process, and you will see it also on your screens for making a kind of a generation of synthetic opioid drugs, generally called fentanyl. Why is fentanyl in news, and why are we featuring fentanyl in today's Cut the Clutter? So Xi Jinping and Joe Biden have had their summit, their much awaited summit in San Francisco. There were three main items on the agenda. One you would understand, that was to restore US and Chinese diplomatic and military communications, basically trying to repair what has deteriorated over the past 3 or 4 years. We've seen that Chinese-American relationship has become very fraught over the last 3 or 4 years. With this will come all these strategic issues, including Taiwan, including the Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, etc., etc. Then there was also the need to bring back cooperation or a common thinking on the subject of climate change. Again, a subject which is of great global importance, but where nothing can happen unless US and China work together, one being the superpower, the other being the deputy superpower, wanting the job of the main superpower. The third issue that came up, particularly from the American side, from the Chinese side, there were other asks, one of which was also claiming legitimacy for Xi Jinping's third term, because once the American president hosts him, it's not as if the Chinese president needs or requires any endorsement from the Americans, but it is still because he's got a third term which is unprecedented. He's made his own law and constitution. To be received by Joe Biden, by the US president, is a big leg up for him. That besides, what is the third thing that the Americans added? That was fentanyl crisis. Now, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. We have to understand this. What are opioids? Opioids are those drugs, many of these are used in pharmaceutical as ethical, legitimate, medically prescribed pharmaceuticals. Like morphine, for example, used for pain control, used for many other situations. Many are used as tranquilizers in psychiatry, other medications, but mostly the stronger opioids are used for pain control. In America, there's been a controversy for a long time that opioids are being overprescribed, especially to the rich patients carrying insurance, carrying comprehensive insurance, which pays for it. And in this case, by doctors who are in cahoots with pharmaceutical industry that makes opioids. That is one controversy in the US. It causes a lot of deaths. The larger controversy, however, is not about the natural opioids, if I may use that expression, opioids that essentially grow out of opium, out of the poppy plant. Now you have a new category of drugs or pharmaceuticals, also illicit drugs called synthetic opioids. These are then created using chemicals. One of those processes is what I showed you on your screens. And I'm careful, this is something that's available from legitimate open channels on internet. I'm not just watching Breaking Bad and bringing you some fake formulae or offering you some do-it-yourself help as well. First of all, you can't do it. Second, don't try doing it. The problem in America is what we need to understand. Fentanyl misuse or fentanyl abuse now has become such a major problem in America that 110,000 opioid deaths, opioid misuse or abuse deaths, a bulk of them, most of them from fentanyl. And in fact, in other opioids also and other drugs also, fentanyl is mixed. Our Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia told Rajya Sabha that in 2022, India had a total of nearly 8 lakh cancer deaths from all kinds of cancers. If you multiply the number of opioid deaths by 5 in America, 5 because America's population is about a fifth of India's. If you do that, then you reach a number which is not that far from India's cancer deaths. In fact, 69% cases of opioid overdose and fatalities in America are among the men. So if you just look at the male population and if you see that in India about 4 lakh men die of cancer every year, that is in terms of just male population. As a proportion of population, the Americans have suffered more fatalities from fentanyl abuse than Indians from cancer. Once again, there is one more very important demographic of those dying of fentanyl addiction or fentanyl abuse, as would be for most dangerous substances. Most of the people are young. So fentanyl abuse has now become the leading cause of fatalities. The largest cause of fatalities among people, particularly men, between the age groups of 18 to 49. So it is taking away a lot of people in terms of proportion of population, taking away as many people almost as cancer does in all of India, which is almost 5 times the size of America. But also it's taking almost all of them away in the prime of their lives, in the age group of 18 to 49. Now, why are the Americans so worried about this vis-a-vis China? If Americans have a drug abuse problem, if fentanyl is being misused in America and is causing so many deaths, and you can see if it's causing so many deaths, it's causing so much sickness, it's destroying so many lives, families, it's straining the system, so on and so forth. Why aren't the Americans controlling it in their own country? So just as for opioids, just as for heroin, for example, you say that I will try and control heroin cultivation in Afghanistan, or heroin cultivation or cocaine cultivation in Southern and Latin America. Similarly, fentanyl has precursor chemicals. Fentanyl is not produced as factory by itself. So fentanyl has precursors. Those precursors have names. They are complicated. You can see them on the chart that I shared with you. I'll again share it with you, and the chart will freeze on your screen. Once again, don't try and buy anything, make anything. First of all, you can't do it. And second, you must never try to do it. And third, it will be very illegal to try such a thing. Nevertheless, the chemicals, this is open scientific knowledge. The chemicals, the two main precursors are N-phenyethyl 4-piperidone or NPP and N-anilino N-phenyethyl piperidine or ANPP. These have now been put under international controls. Then there are precursors. 3 precursors of these chemicals. These are the precursors of fentanyl, but these are further made from chemicals which would be called precursors. Those are norfentanyl 4AP and 1-BOC 4AP. Once again, algebra, which I know nothing about, nor do you know anything about, and we don't need to know anything about, but just because we have the curiosity that how do you create this drug and what is a synthetic opioid? An opioid comes originally from the poppy plant. A poppy plant leads many useful things, many life-saving drugs. Some of the strongest antidiarrheals in the world are made from the poppy plant. But poppy plant also leads some really bad substances which can be abused, including heroin. Fentanyl, on the other hand, is produced chemically in a lab. It's produced chemically in a lab. It's very potent. It is so potent that I read a story on the Wall Street Journal, and I will just share with you a list of the pieces and articles that we read from and that I think you should have handy as a reference in case you want to understand this better. So potent is fentanyl that the equivalent of 2 sugar sachets of fentanyl can supply one adult human being whole years of needs. An addict's whole year's needs. So small it is, you can then see how easy it might be to smuggle it. All of the chemicals that I mentioned to you as precursors and precursors, they've all been added to the Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances of 1988. Under that convention, all of these have been banned. So what is America's pain point with the Chinese? America's pain point with the Chinese is that none of these drugs is made in America. Why? Because the basic chemicals, the precursor and pre-precursor chemicals are not made in America. They are smuggled from outside. Some are smuggled from outside, mostly from Mexico, from America's southern borders, which are quite porous in spite of everything that Trump may have tried to do or that other governments have tried to do, and also through what seem to be legitimate transshipment channels, including the regular courier network sent by DHL, right? Most of these are sold or sent from China because the basic industry to make these precursor and pre-precursor chemicals all thrives in China. China is one of the biggest chemical producers in the world and also the biggest API, that is active pharmaceutical ingredients producer in the world. In fact, when you and I swallow a crocin or dolo or whatever you call it for pain and fever, chances are that its basic ingredient has come from China. Chinese dominate the global API market. Chinese dominate the global chemicals market. In fact, the Chinese at this point have 43% of all of the world's chemical market. Some of that chemical industry in China also makes fentanyl precursors and pre-precursors. The problem with stopping that is that you can put sanctions on them and you can put restrictions on China, but a lot of these are legitimate chemicals which have many uses. So you can ban a drug, but it's very difficult to ban a basic chemical which goes into a drug because the same chemical may be going into many other uses also, and to that extent be completely innocent. To understand this better, in case you are curious, I will share some readings with you. All these readings will be listed. You will have the links with the description of this episode. So first is a March 2023 story by Julie Vernau in Wall Street Journal. That story simply explains to us what is fentanyl, and I have read up from that, and some of what I am telling you is knowledge drawn from that story. She also tells us that fentanyl is a substance which can be used as a shot, as an injection, as a patch, so you can stick it to your skin, lozenges, you can chew it, and it can be sprayed. It can be a spray that can be used in the nose and tongue. Again, that the American Society of Health System pharmacists calls it, also says that this is mixed with other drugs. For example, this is mixed with the strong tranquilizer drug xylazine. With xylazine, it is used to make a cocktail. Now, xylazine is a strong tranquilizer and painkiller drug with one difference. It's not a drug that is cleared for use in human beings. It's a drug that is only cleared for use for veterinary purposes. You take a bit of that, not you, the bad guys take a bit of that and a bit of fentanyl and make a cocktail. That cocktail becomes doubly potent, and not just that, it becomes that much cheaper. So the American Society of Health Systems pharmacists, they confirm of all the seized fentanyl powder in America and all of the 7% fentanyl pills seized, xylazine was found as an adulterant. So xylazine, which is a painkiller drug for animals, that's being used to further boost the effect of fentanyl and also to make it cheaper by increasing the volume. At this point, fentanyl is reckoned to be 50 times more powerful than heroin and 100 times more powerful than morphine. That's the reason I told you that 2 sugar sachets in weight of fentanyl can supply an addict for an entire year. It is also further mixed, Julie Vernau tells us, with baking soda, starch, sugar, etc. That's called the cooking of this substance, and that's how it's also reduced into some kind of a sellable or retailable commodity. So widespread it is now, and so widespread is the adulteration, obviously deliberate adulteration, that in the city of Columbus in the state of Ohio, the local administration is actually giving strips that you can use to check whether a drug you are buying is adulterated with fentanyl or not. In New York at the same time, there is further concern of the 980 cocaine deaths in New York in a particular period. 81% had a fentanyl connection. So once again, people are mixing drugs. How does fentanyl work? It works by binding to the body's opioid receptors, the brain's opioid receptors. These are the parts of the brain that control pain and emotions. And what happens? Again, these are studies of National Institute of Drug Abuse. What happens is this addiction becomes so strong that after a while, without this drug, without fentanyl, human body is unable to feel any pleasure. So that is how it traps you. Then again, as you would expect in the American system, antidotes have come up. Antidotes are also expensive. Government literature also lists antidotes. So that's a bit like what we talked about once, broken window economics, which is one way of driving up your economics is break your window, somebody will come and fix it. You break it again, somebody will again come and fix it. So that will generate some economic activity, some jobs, some revenues, some taxes. So it's a bit like that. You first got substance abuse, then people get sick with that. Then to control that, you find antidotes. So first people pay for substance to abuse. Then after they've done it, they've done the bad stuff, then they can also buy antidotes. So that is the trap America is on. So that's the first article you should read. The second is a CRS report, a Congressional Research Service report, which is as recent as September 28, 2023. So the CRS report is titled, again you can see the screenshot on my screen, China Primer, Illicit Fentanyl and China's Role. This is a CRS report. Please see that. It's a detailed report with lots of data. Third, a New York Times article from June 23, 2023 by Benjamin Weiser and Karen Zreich. And that is headlined, US charging Chinese firms. So this gives you details of the Chinese firms that the US is charged with illegal selling or smuggling or transshipment of fentanyl ingredients into America. Number fourth is a US Treasury, a US government press release dated October 3, 2023. So you can see how recent all of this is and how fast this movement is. And this is a press release on the sanctioning of 28 individuals and entities, mostly in China, for fentanyl smuggling. Basically, fentanyl precursor smuggling. Fifth, there is a Department of Justice document, US Department of Justice. This is the unsealing of 8 indictments or revelation of 8 indictments of Chinese companies and employees for fentanyl smuggling. And finally, because you must see all sides, in this case, the other side comes from the inimitable Global Times. So there's a detailed article from Global Times of June 26, 2023. The article is titled very directly, as we are used to seeing from the Global Times, one and only Global Times. The article is titled, "This American Disease is Indeed Incurable." It's an editorial. And what do they go on to say? They say that US Department of Justice is charging Chinese individuals with crimes related to, and I'm quoting this, related to fentanyl problems. And they say that they claim that these were ensnared through an American sting operation in a third country, which they call illegitimate. The Global Times calls these American sting operations in a third country illegitimate and says that America is expanding its jurisdiction illegally. Then they say that these companies are being charged with allegations that they traffic the chemicals used to make fentanyl. And then Global Times goes on to say it is a landmark event in US hyping up the fentanyl issue and playing the fentanyl card for some time. Then it gets into more detail. And some name calling also. First of all, they said that, look, we have suffered, the Chinese have suffered so much during the Opium War. So we are the last people you would expect of ignoring a drug problem. Trying to put the label of drug trafficker on China, the country with the most severe crackdown on drugs in the world. This kind of hype is sinister, but also very amateurish, says the Global Times. Then they say, and this is the most important part, this is what I said to you earlier, that there is no such thing as fentanyl smuggling. What is sold illegally, illegitimately, or what is smuggled is basic chemicals which can be used to make fentanyl. And see the Chinese explanation, made in English language, through Global Times, and I now quote chapter and verse. It says, the fentanyl precursors mentioned by the US side are actually chemicals that can be involved in the production of fentanyl, but they are ordinary commodities that are not controlled under international drug conventions and Chinese law, and the products previously sanctioned by the US side even include ordinary medical molds such as capsule filling machines. It is like, and see the rhetoric, and see how brilliant this rhetoric is. You can disagree with it. Of course, I disagree with it. But look at the brilliance of the rhetoric and how well is this argument made. In fact, many of your multi-million-dollar lawyers or multi-10 crore lawyers in Delhi would marvel at it. So the argument is, and I quote again, it's like when there's a mass shooting in the US, instead of looking for the cause within itself, the blame is placed on countries that export steel. Because after all, with the steel you will make guns, with the steel you will make bullets. No, I'm adding that. Instead of looking for the cause within itself, the blame is placed on countries that export steel. Does sanctioning companies that export steel mean there will be no more shootings in the US? And then there is the usual condemnation of the US, that 12% of the global drug users come from America, which is 3 times the proportion of the US population. US population will be just over 4 and 5% of the world. So you can do the math yourself. Then it asks a question, why is it that with 5% of the world's population, the US consumes 80% of the world's opioids? Why does the US fentanyl problem continue to worsen despite increasingly tighter international controls? Then Global Times brings back the painful memory of opium war, saying that we are the victims, Chinese are the victims, and America is just using this as an excuse to place illegal sanctions. Once again, see the Chinese defense. And I will again read chapter and verse. It says, it should be pointed out that like the issue of gun control, the drug problem is also known as an American disease that is difficult to cure. Its emergence, development, and becoming a chronic disease are closely related to America's management, culture, and social division. In today's America, the Republican Party advocates for guns, while the Democratic Party advocates for drugs, which is a dominant political culture. So what they mean is that a lot of the America is soft on misuse of guns. Similarly, a lot of the rest of America, particularly the Democratic Party, whose president is in power now, they are soft on drug abuse. So if you are soft, don't blame the Chinese. Finally, they conclude, unfortunately, compared to the tangible American disease of drug abuse and the intangible American disease of abnormal mentality towards China is even more difficult to cure because there is a blame China for everything culture. So at a popular level or at a rhetorical level, Chinese have rejected these charges. Whereas in the talks, it seems that once again, there have been assurances exchanged, because from all evidence that I read, from all global media, research organizations, it doesn't look like the Chinese government is officially involved in the smuggling or this fabrication of these chemicals. China has a very large chemical industry and a very large pharma industry. I told you earlier, China's chemical industry commands 43% of the global exports. China's pharmaceutical industry is $155 billion at last count. In comparison, India, we take pride in being the pharmacy of the world. We are $50 billion. So we are a long way. We'll be $50 billion maybe next year, right? So we are a long way from being even 1/3 of the size of the Chinese pharma industry. Within this, because there is a lot of small industries and they do this stuff, Xi Jinping, can he not control it? If he wants, he can control anything. But again, I read from analysts, mostly Americans, because they are the victims, from the CRS report that I mentioned to you earlier. Also Brookings Research and Joseph Sternberg, columnist for political economy at Wall Street Journal, who also says that China's pharmaceutical industry has thousands of minimally regulated private sector companies that are adding to this problem as well. So once again, if the Chinese really want to fix it, they will fix it. At the same time, if they think they have leverage and it is not something that is corrupting their society or that is sort of bleaching into their society and causing problems there, they can take their time with it. So this is a big pain point for the Americans, particularly Democrats. It's also a bargaining chip for the Chinese. So what happens when the world's two most powerful leaders met, leaders of the two most powerful countries, besides all these strategic issues that they talk about, at the heart of their agenda is also this little chemical cocktail which now kills more Americans or almost as many Americans as cancer does in all of India as a proportion of the population.